Up to this point, my Southern Ocean heavy weather tactic had been to keep the boat moving through all the gales. The wind by now had reached a sustained mean of 45 to 50 knots. By this time, I was quite adept at judging wind strength and sea height, having been subjected to almost continuous heavy weather since South Africa, 5,500 miles away. The seas had become enormous. The day wore on, and night closed in. This was, after all, midwinter in the roaring 40s, so nights were extremely long, and days very short. I was totally exhausted. This was the worst yet. It's hard to describe the conditions. By now, the gale had raged for 48 hours already, with the high-pitched scream, it was literally that, of the wind in the rigging wires, and the continual rumble of the huge breaking combers, long curving waves and breakers, all around the boat. Before the onset of dark, I had been too scared to look out of the dome of the main hatch. The entire vista was so terrifying. The seas have become monstrous mountains, 40 to 60 foot high. Huge tumbling breaks collapsing down their fronts. Awe-inspiring doesn't describe it. The blackness closed down on this scene from hell. I wedged myself across the cabin, wrapped in my bedding. Sleep was out of the question, in spite of complete and utter exhaustion. I just lay there and waited. Without wishing to sound in any way heroic, it never once occurred to me that I wouldn't get through, or to ask for any kind of rescue. Complete trust in my little boat was essential, and in the event, she repaid my faith in her. We didn't have to wait very long. The growling thump of the large breaks all around meant it was only a matter of time before one would hit directly over the boat. The first knockdown, when the boat is knocked 90 degrees, was of course the most shocking. There was an almighty roar like an express train. Then, an explosive crash as the brake hit the side of the boat. In a split second, Tessa was on her side, with the mast horizontal. Everything in the cabin that could fly flew fast as we were smashed sideways at high speed. Apparently, if you break up an ant's nest, their first reaction is to wash their faces. Well, I guess I was like an ant. My immediate reaction was one of indignation, and I set to putting everything dislodged back in its rightful place. This was a Shackletonian discipline that had evolved over months of Southern Ocean sailing. I had to know where everything was, or chaos would ensue and endanger the ship. The old sailor's prayer, "Lord, thy oceans so vast, my ship so small. Guide me, O Lord, guide me," was very fitting at this point. Equally apt was Bernard Matissier's poignant description of Joshua from around 1966 in a South Pacific survival storm that lasted 76 hours. Like a little pygmy hunter in the jungle, trying to avoid the blows of the huge gorillas. It is not the huge seas that damage a strong, well-found yacht. It's the breaking tops of the seas, several tons of very fast-moving water, that present the greatest danger. An hour later, the same again. Indignant swearing, as I put everything back once more. By now, all the stowage cubbies were being stuffed with any available spare clothing, cushions, etc. The galley cubby was blocked off with a sheet of plywood, so that in the event of a repeat, at least all its contents were contained, rather than flying jars breaking on the other side of the cabin, leaving a trail of jam or chutney, and a lot of dangerous broken shards of glass too. For me, this was a night of reckoning, and I was already completely exhausted. 2 more of these violent knockdowns occurred. They were frightening because of the sheer vicious force. First, the roar of the brake, then the terrifying impact, like a 5-ton sledgehammer. Shortly after, the rollovers were almost benign by comparison, as they were relatively quiet. The mast was horizontal again, but instead of stopping there, it just kept on and on and on to 180 degrees upside down, and then on and on round and up the other side. In the space of about 40 seconds, I was thrown out of my bunk, onto the ceiling, the deckhead as it's known, then back onto my bunk again. The whole rollover happened quite slowly, because 5 tons of ballast bolted to the keel of the boat and a 32-foot mast are being pulled in a 360-degree circle. Throughout the time I spent upside down, the most noticeable thing was the complete and utter silence. As Tessa righted herself, the raging, thunderous black maelstrom started again. My first reaction was to shine the torch through the dome to check the mast. Thank God for that. It's still there. Losing the mast was my greatest fear, and although I could see other damage, mast and rig were still intact.